I like really make me breathe shallow.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's discussion with Sundae Schneider-Bean at sundaebean.com, who is an intercultural specialist and expat life coach, really, about like helping people help them through their life through lots of transitions. And she is extremely experienced in crises and transitions herself. And that's what we're going to talk about today is your tumultuous experience in Burkina Faso. So welcome. Sundae, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and sort of just describe what happened in Burkina Faso, that'd be great.
Okay, well, I am born and raised from North Dakota in the United States. Moved to Switzerland 16 some years ago. My husband is Swiss, and we decided after having 2 children and creating our lives in Switzerland, decided to go to Burkina Faso for an assignment on my partner's side, and for me to bring my company as intercultural specialist and coach with me, and also to have that intercultural experience. You asked me about my experience in Burkina Faso. I mean, before we started recording, I named about 4 or 5 things that would qualify as a crisis. And it gives the impression that it was so horrible and bad and dangerous. But to be honest, I absolutely loved the 2.5 years that I was in Burkina Faso and really enjoyed my time and miss it deeply. I really do miss it deeply. We lived in Ouagadougou, met some amazing people, and learned a lot along the way. And generally, aside these, 4 or 5 things that were quite unnerving, live just a normal life where, you bring your kids to school, you work, you see your friends on the weekend, and then you travel for vacations. So that's, I think, important to say. At the same time, being born and raised in the Midwest in the U.S. and then living in such a safe place like Switzerland, what I encountered there was totally new for me. And you say, an expert in crisis, I feel like a total rookie because this is, I keep experiencing these things, but this isn't something I've lived with for decades.
Yeah.
So one of the first things that came that, how should I say it? You have to understand, me moving to Burkina Faso already felt like a stretch in my comfort zone. Mm-hmm. In Switzerland, we would do things like, is this apple regional and organic? Should I use the teething gel for my baby that's natural, or should we use the bad chemical one, right? So then like getting our kids, tons of immunizations, going to a place where there's a risk of malaria, already felt like a stretch. The healthcare facilities are much lower grade quality than what you find in Europe. So as a mom, as a parent, I was already stretching myself. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important to put into context because some people, have different needs and range for security and for facilities and that sort of thing. And then we'd been there. We had a wonderful time. I think we'd gone on vacation and come back. I can't really remember. But then there was the Ebola crisis in West Africa. And being in West Africa, although not in any of the countries where Ebola wasn't, it made us think, like, could this come to Burkina? Yeah. What if it does? What do we do as parents? Right. My husband and I'm not going to speak for him, but I think we're less afraid of ourselves. We more want to just protect our kids.
Yeah.
So that was probably our first, ruffling of feathers of, okay, what does this really look like? And what is our responsibility? What can we do to prevent it? And that's where I think it was the first test of, is this rational? Is this fear or an anxiety or thoughtfulness around it? Is it rational? Mm-hmm. Meaning, what are the real chances of something happening in Burkina Faso? And I think it was the beginning of a training ground for me to say, let's look at the facts. Mm-hmm. And the U.S. Embassy did a really great job. They invited the community to come and listen to doctors and specialists around the situation, what you can do to prevent it, how likely it was. So I'm a fact finder. So I loved going there and using information to reduce my uncertainty. Mm-hmm. Yes. And we realized for our comfort zones, it felt totally fine to stay in Burkina Faso. And the next step would be if there was a case, in the outer regions, we would have another discussion. If it came into Ouagadougou itself, then we'd have another discussion. But let's not freak out until it feels, like something that is like from a fact-based place, a high risk. And then we see things like my brother living in Dallas, and then Ebola came to Dallas, so.
Yes. And that's the thing. I mean, my background is in public health. And so we were very much involved in the Ebola and monitoring it. And I had colleagues who were in Sierra Leone and colleagues who were there. And so, I was talking with them, and they're on the boots telling me what's happening. And so when you have that sort of insight knowledge, you're like, okay, like this can affect anywhere, and diseases are global and they can travel. And so you really, unless it can go anywhere. And so you're more likely if you're geographically close, but it doesn't mean it's impossible being farther away. And so, yeah. So again, and I do
as a hospital in Dallas, Texas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that was probably the first thing, like kind of to my training wheels of, crisis situation for me with my background. And then the next thing that happened, was the revolution happened. There was a revolution. Well, how shall I say it? They have another name for that. A political uprising is another way that they called it, where they ousted the president after 27 years. And that was a tense moment for me personally, because one, I've never lived in West Africa during a revolution or some sort of political uprising. Right. I didn't have a frame of reference. I didn't know where it would go. My sense of the Burkina Faso are very grounded, peaceful, non-violent. It's not like some of the ethnic conflicts you've seen in our history. So I didn't feel like there was that tension, that potential. But what was scary there was, we were in our house and we knew that people were protesting, and thousands, and even some say hundreds of thousands, if not close to 1 million people were on the streets at one point. But there was before the lead up to this, there was, I was reading a book on my terrace with my child, and I think it was a Saturday, and all of a sudden I heard whistles, and then there were like hundreds of people in the street in front of our house, and they were peacefully protesting and singing because there was some prime minister, some important political official that actually lived in the corner where our street was, and I didn't know that. Right. And I thought, oh, okay, so now there's someone in this political scene that is in our neighborhood, and these hundreds of people made it clear that they know where he lives and that they want to peacefully say, please don't vote for this amendment. And that kind of triggered me of, wow, things can change really fast. I was just reading this book, we were by ourselves, and now there's hundreds of people on the street in protest, and it was peaceful, but it triggered something inside of me that said something could change fast, and I don't have control over that. And it was really beyond my comfort zone, and the unknowing was beyond my comfort zone. As a mom, I want to have certainty or do as much as I can, and that ruffled my feathers even more because it felt very, very, very physical, like on my street. Worried about was something going to happen in my neighborhood, or even more like if things started to get crazy and we kind of hunkered down in our house. Mm-hmm. I didn't feel like we would be a target at all. The question is, what if my son trips and, breaks his thing? I had a situation I told you about where one of my kids bit his tongue almost in half, and we had to go to the doctor just suddenly. And what if there's something going on and you can't leave your home to get to a doctor?
Streets are closed or whatever.
Yeah, and it was more like, well, what if we have to hunker down? They call it shelter in place for 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, 8 days, and something stupid happens, like bad timing, and that was really hard for me. I learned a lot during that process. That was probably, for anybody who goes through a crisis that's listening to this, I would say, when something pops up, it's really important to pay attention to your default mode. I noticed I had uncertainty, so what I was trying to do was reduce the uncertainty by getting information. And that meant I was calling people, asking, what do you think? What do you think? And my husband was saying, Sundae, no one knows. No one can know. Right. You're asking for something that isn't possible. And in hindsight, I know that he's right, but don't tell him that I said that. Yeah. Now he's quite wise. And I see that now, but in that moment I was in like, let's find this out. Let's reduce my uncertainty, right? And in fact, I can't know. And what now I see that happening after 2 or 3 other things happen, where he was really grounded in that moment, saying, we can't know more. We as a family need to decide, because we have as much information as anybody else. And that I realized for me, what I learned about myself was, you can look outside to the embassies, you can look to your friends who've been in the region longer, but at the end of the day, it's your yeah. And my needs are very different from my neighbor's needs. Maybe I have way higher preference for certainty than my neighbor, or maybe my neighbor is way uncomfortable, way faster. So you really can't use other people to judge.
Right.
You can use them as a gauge, but not to make the end decision. And, I have friends who've been through crazy political crises and have resilience and have developed strategies and have a comfort level with that. And then there are other people who have way lower levels of tolerance for those things. So, no one has my exact level. It's me and my family, and we have to make a choice what we do based on that.
Yeah, you have to know yourself. You have to be in tune with what you're comfortable with and what you're not. And sometimes you don't realize you're uncomfortable with it until you're already in it. And then
exactly. And you're
not comfortable.
Right. So you can't necessarily prepare for the unexpected, right? But what you can do is have some conversations. If you live in a fragile context, you can have some conversations with your partner in advance and say, what would be our go point? Like, what would have to happen now that we're rational, we're calm, and we're not in the fear mode? What would have to happen for us to say, let's change this, or let's do something different? And that's a good conversation to have before you really, really need to, as a touch point. So, yeah, and I think, then some other things happened. And as more things happened, I felt I was more grounded, and I could make a decision more clearly, even though it still wasn't easy. Mm-hmm. I was able to get clearer on what made sense for me, for my preferences and my values. And I wasn't in that scrambling, fact-finding mode as long as I was during the first sort of, crisis that hit us.
So what was it that prompted you to decide that this wasn't going to work for you anymore, and you were taking the kids back to Switzerland?
Okay, so probably a little background. So after the revolution or the political uprising, there was a coup d'etat, or a faux coup d'etat, that happened over a period of 4 to 8 days, and that was right before the elections. We had a transition government for a year. Then we had the attempted coup, and there were the elections that were peaceful and democratic. So we came back. So this had already been kind of like a couple things that happened where I felt like I wanted to take the kids to Switzerland to just sort of wait and see what happened, and then come back when I felt like things were back to normal again. Okay. And then in January 15th, the terrorist attacks happened in Ouagadougou, and that was on the street where my partner works and where we had coffee and where I met clients. And this was an example of where during the coup, I had a conversation with my husband where I said, there are certain boundaries where there were, attacks or not attacks, but like threats for jihadists on the Malian border, and there were zones that are red where you shouldn't go. And then the zones got bigger, and then they moved to areas that were okay before, and then they were at this area. And so places where people were vacationing when we first moved there were now no-go zones. Mm. And while this coup was happening, there was an article that I read. It was just a blip where there was an attempt. They called them jihadists on the border, and they attacked these guards. And I saw it, but then my husband didn't see it. And I said, "Did you see the article?" "Oh no, maybe it was just a blip. Maybe it wasn't true." And then we said, "Well, let's talk about that. What is our comfort zone? What has to happen in the country from a terrorist perspective for us to say there are too many zones that are getting red or orange for our comfort zone?" And we had that conversation, and we said, just like the Ebola question of, well, if it comes in the outer areas, we'll have another conversation. If it comes closer, we'll have another conversation. And we said, if something starts happening in the cities that are a little bit more inland, we're going to have a serious talk about that. And if it happens in Ouagadougou, then we're really going to have a serious talk, because maybe that's then not good for the kids anymore. I never felt like my husband was threatened or I was threatened. It just felt like if it came really in our city, then things feel our values of security, fun, and freedom feel compromised.
Right.
And so when it hit Ouagadougou, it was just a massive, massive blow. Nothing to do with me or my family, just like something sacred was broken, something so horrible, something so unjust, and something happened to people that are doing amazing things in the country and have honestly, and the Burkina Faso weren't a necessary target, so it was like doing something terrible to this amazing country with these amazing people who worked so hard to stabilize, and it just felt like such a blow. And so I think initially we were just in mourning for the loss, for the families, for the shift in security that we all felt, for the injustice towards the Burkina Faso. It was just very painful, and I didn't want to go. we love our life in Ouagadougou with our families together, and I absolutely did not want to go. However, we had that conversation of before, like,
this crosses our line. Is
this really in alignment? We said before that was probably crossing the line, and I took a really hard look at the situation. I still had a year, like 18 months left with my husband's assignment, and I took a real hard look. What do I have to do to have my needs for security, freedom, and fun met? Can I get those met? And will my need for security squash the freedom or squash some of the fun? Or will I have freedom and fun, but then I loosen up the security, right? And at the end of the day, I had to make a decision for us, because no one can say what will happen in 18 months.
Yeah.
And, me jogging out in my neighborhood, it's very obvious I'm not Burkina Faso. So can I go jogging anymore? Is that a risk? Is it totally safe? Those are big questions. And even though, the schools did great things to increase security, the country stepped up, like everybody reacted in a really great way to create the optimal situation based on the circumstances. But then I had to still look at, was this in alignment with what my needs were, and, I could go into more details, but I had to make a call, as a family, and we just said it feels my whole body, whether it makes sense or not, because of the circumstances, my whole body said it is more in alignment with my family values to keep my children in school consistently, because we'd already taken the kids out a couple times because of the other things that were going on. I want continuity for my kids. There were certain things we laid on the table, and I thought, this feels like a safer bet. Is it the right choice? That's no one knows that, because everything in hindsight, something tragic could happen when you move to Switzerland. Right. Something tragic could be if you stayed, right? Is it the right choice? Is it an easy choice? No.
Yeah.
Is it the convenient choice? No. Is it, but at the end of the day, we had to do what felt like was an alignment for us. And that is really important, because, I'm doing a lot on my end to make this work. My husband's, sacrificing a lot on his end. And so when you're struggling with those things, you really need to know what your big why is. Like, why did you do it? Why did it make sense? Why was this the right choice for you and your family? And then move forward with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. Do you have any resources or blog posts about this? So if someone is in a location that is somewhat maybe politically charged, they could reference it on your website?
Yeah, you know what? Let me write that down. I will. I have several interviews that I've done and things that I've done, and things I wrote right after.
Yeah, send me the links and I'll link it to the video.
Yep.
Wonderful.
And people can always contact me. I'm working on something in the back of my mind around abrupt transitions.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that's typical of expat life, and I think needs more attention, and I've got something in the works, about how, something happens, there's a political crisis, or the assignment gets cut short, or the funding is cut, or you get fired, or you get transferred, that I don't feel like we're talking enough about abrupt transitions. How transition itself is hard enough,
yeah.
When you're leaving in 2 years or 3 years or 6 months, but the abrupt transitions
are
hard, or the unintentional transitions, where I have a client who was dealing with a health issue and left to deal with that and ended up realizing, I'm not going back.
Yeah.
Because of, the change of circumstances. So how do you mourn that? How do you create closure? What do you do with your grief?
Yeah.
And I think that's hard, because there's this idea of grief is typically reserved for loss of a loved one, the loss of life. And that's a sacred space of grieving. At the same time, there's another type of grief that people go through when they mourn the loss of a home,
right?
And or a way of life. And I know one of the major things that feels a loss is, we created our family. We brought a 1-year-old and a turned 5-year-old to Burkina Faso, and now a 4 and almost 8, and we kind of gelled as a family in Burkina. Mm-hmm. And that was where, we're a binational family, so we were finally in a neutral territory, not Switzerland, not the U.S. So we created a third space as a family where we gelled, and that's a sacred space to be in. And then it changed.
Yeah.
Right. So what do you do with that? And a lot of expat families go through that, where you move to who knows where, you gel as a family, you create these amazing memories, and then it's gone. And then that also for children, having that physical environment as a reference point is a big loss. My 4-year-old always asks, he says he misses the normal house.
Aww.
I know, I feel so bad. It's like, and yeah, I mean, when he's 4, how do you talk about that? And this morning at breakfast, he said, I miss the normal house, and I miss our nanny that we had. And I just gave him a big hug, and I was like, honey, I know I miss that too, and that's okay to feel sad. And it sort of triggered for me, I need to do a little bit more with my children, and honestly with myself around sort of acknowledging what we had, and celebrating that, and also, grieving that to some extent. Yeah. So I've got some ideas what we'll do this summer to sort of create more closure around that.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've moved around a lot within Sweden, so we haven't even moved, but my son is 5 and we've moved 4 times. That's a lot. And he, even at 5, he knows, he's like, I miss, and he names his friends from other houses ago. I miss this house. Oh, remember the old house? Well, which old house? And so so the transitions are hard, but I know we're at the top of our time. So I want to be respectful of your time. Is there anything else you would like to say or close with before we end?
I would say that if anyone who's listening, if it comes up in the future, if you've been processing it yourself, if you're going through a tough transition, an unexpected transition, or repeated transition, that it's really important to reach out for support. Because this is, even though maybe you live in an expat context and everybody's doing it, doesn't mean you need to do it alone. And it doesn't mean that you can't optimize it so you feel like you're absolutely making the most of it and honoring all of the roller coaster of emotions that come with it. So feel free to reach out anytime, sundaebean.com. You can email me directly with specific questions that you have, and I'd love to keep the conversation going.
Yes, thank you. And you are wonderful to chat with, I know from personal experience. So thank you again, Sundae, for joining us. And we will link to all of your resources with the video so that people can access them. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.